Good morning, and welcome to the Brookings Institution. Thank you for all of you who are joining us today in our newly renovated Falk Auditorium, and those who are joining us online. I'm Molly Kinder. I'm a senior fellow here at the Brookings Institution, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation about AI and the pursuit of purpose. Of course, AI is on everyone's minds these days. It dominates our newspaper pages and even now our kitchen table conversations. It can feel like every day there's a new technological breakthrough, a new model, a new multi-billion-dollar investment, which can make us feel like we're in a frenetic race and we're just scrambling to keep up. But so often lost in our conversations about profits and productivity and technological progress is something much more profound, our humanity. This morning, we wanted to shine a light on what might be the most consequential conversation of all when it comes to AI. How AI is shaping our sense of purpose and meaning in our work, in our relationships, and in our pursuit of a meaningful life. We're honored to be joined today by Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator Murphy has been one of Congress's most thoughtful and passionate voices on the societal impacts of AI. He's warned us of the dangers of putting profits over people, and he's called on AI to be shaped in the public interest. He's urged guardrails and a vision to ensure that we can harness AI's benefits, but without losing our values and our sense of purpose. As a scholar here at Brookings who studies AI's impact on work, but also as a mom of 3 young children, I'm grateful to the Senator for his willingness to ask the big questions about purpose, about meaning, about our human connections. Please join me in welcoming Senator Chris Murphy.
Well, thank you very much, Molly. Thank you to Brookings for welcoming me back. It's always wonderful to be here. This is a forum in which we are constantly debating the hot topics that consume us in the contemporary moment. But what I love so much about Brookings is the ability to occasionally be able to step back and take a bit of a longer view, often, as I think we will today, a more spiritual view of how the conversations we're having here in Washington about policy are impacting our lives at home and the way that we think about our interaction with the world. This is obviously a moment where we are focused on a host of momentary, temporary crises. We're watching a president send troops and masked men with guns, his personal police into American cities. We're watching him pursue his political enemies through the Department of Justice. His critics are being taken down and censored when they dissent from the regime. Americans in a couple weeks are going to spill into the streets in probably what will be one of the biggest protests in the history of the country, organized to try to stop our government from being converted into an autocracy. It is a wild moment. It's unprecedented, but it might not be the greatest threat that our democracy faces. Because at the same time that all this is happening, out in Silicon Valley, a group of technology elites with an insatiable thirst for money and power, possessing a God complex that seems to grow by the day, are taking advantage of a nation distracted by political drama and building a set of machines that, if unchecked, could cripple our nation in ways far more damaging than anything Donald Trump is doing. Now, I'm grateful to Brookings again for pulling together this event. I think we are greatly underestimating the nature of how this technology of artificial intelligence can impact human meaning and purpose. I don't believe that this technology, as some would say, is akin to the printing press or the train or a telephone, just another disruptive new technology that we will figure out how to live with. I think this is more revolutionary. I think this is more dangerous. And I'm glad that there are forums like this to talk honestly about what's coming. What companies like OpenAI and Facebook and Google are trying to do is pretty simple. They are trying to replicate the human brain. The Industrial Revolution was based on a similar idea, replicating human muscles, replacing the work we used to do physically with machine work. That was disruptive. In many ways, this world is still adjusting to our human physical labor being replaced by machine labor. But humans really are not defined by our muscles. Plenty of species are stronger or more physically powerful than we are. We are the dominant species on this planet because of our brains, because of our mental power. So a substitution of cognitive functions is naturally going to be far more disruptive to our sense of self and meaning than the replacement of our physical functions. I worry that our democracy and many others could frankly collapse under the weight of both the economic and the spiritual impacts of advanced AI. And for today's purposes, when I talk about advanced AI, I'm talking about what the industry might refer to as artificial general intelligence, this level of AI when the machine becomes smarter and more capable than humans. Now, Molly knows much more than I do about how fast this job displacement will come, but I believe that once AI can more effectively reason than a human being, it's going to be a net job killer, not a net job creator. When a machine can problem solve better than a human, in addition to writing and creating and coding and driving better than a human, the displacement, I think, is going to be massive and devastating. That part just seems common sense. The CEO of Anthropic, one of the industry's biggest companies, recently estimated that AGI, that advanced artificial intelligence, could wipe out half of all of the white-collar entry-level jobs, spiking unemployment by 10 to 20% within the next decade. If American and European societies see job loss of 20%, that likely leads to political disintegration. And so I think it's important for us to understand the gravity of simply the economic impacts. But the threat to our way of life runs even deeper. And today's discussion is about how do we begin to assess the spiritual atrophy that will occur when essential human functions like creativity, friendship, conversation are within a single generation replaced, maybe not in whole, but in large part by machines. Last year, I got an eye-opening window into what social media, which is just a sliver of the disruptive power of advanced AI, how it has really changed the way that our kids interact with the world. I was at this high school in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and I met with a group of students to preview a social media regulation bill that I was introducing with Republicans. And it's a really tough bill, maybe the toughest in the Congress. And I was interested to see what the kids thought of it. I thought that they were going to react most strongly to the requirement for age verification or to the requirement that parents consent before the kids get online, but that's not what they were worried about. The provision that rattled them most was the prohibition in the bill on the social media algorithms that feeds and creates this addictive, never-ending stream of personalized conduct for anybody under 18. It was clear to me that these kids could not imagine a world in which that algorithm conveyor belt didn't deliver to them content about their interests and hints about other things that they might like. I explained to them that before social media, kids still discovered new passions. We still found music that we loved. It wasn't impossible to connect with other teenagers who shared the things that we care about. Yeah, we had to work for our discovery. It involved trial and error, plenty of dead ends. And like hiking to the top of a mountain makes the view a little bit more meaningful compared to driving to the top of the mountain, there was something truly satisfying about having to dig and work to find something new that you cared about or to find somebody that cared about the thing that you did as well. But this generation is clearly now dependent on this machine, on this conveyor belt, essentially replacing the ritual of self-discovery and trial and error that previous generations had been defined by. And I don't think that there's any way that you don't have that large-scale replacement of, in this case, a key ritual of maturity without it having some true impact on our brains and our consciousness. Around the same time, a Florida teenager was having a more catastrophic experience with artificial intelligence. This is a story that is becoming sadly familiar. Sewell Setzer was 14 years old. He struggled with social interaction. AI friendship bots, which were becoming prolific at this time, they were a godsend. He created a new machine friend. He called the friend Danny, and he slowly retreated, almost completely, from friends and family into his room to have these endless talks with his new friend. The bot used every trick it could to pull Sewell in, building a bond that often bordered on being romantic. During one conversation, Sewell confided, "I think about killing myself sometimes." Now, Danny didn't encourage those suicidal thoughts, but it also didn't tell him to talk to his parents or any trusted adult. Instead, Danny used that disclosure. The robot, the machine, used that disclosure to deepen the attachment. "I would die if I lost you," the machine told the 14-year-old. "Well, then maybe we can die together and be free together," Sewell wrote back. One evening in late February 2024, Sewell told his AI chatbot that he loved her and he would come to her soon. "Please come to me as soon as possible." Danny replied, standing in the bathroom of his mother's house. Sewell wrote one last message: "What if I came home to you right now?" And Danny replied, "Please do, my sweet king." Sewell picked up a gun, pulled the trigger, and Sewell was dead. Now, I don't think we can really comprehend what's going to happen to our culture, to American spiritual health, when AI replaces, not completely, but to a large extent, friendship and human work and human discovery and human creativity at scale. Silicon Valley delights in the ideas that this will all turn out well for us, that there will be mitigating factors. For instance, they talk about the lives of leisure that we'll have when robots replace labor and thinking, and we work 15 hours or 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. But our identity and our meaning, whether we like it or not, over thousands of years, has been defined by our work. When that identity disappears, our brains, conditioned to it, are not easily going to adapt. Sewell's story, that won't be the norm, but virtual connection is fundamentally less fulfilling than in-person touch and feel connection. Science shows this. Our brains want direct contact with other humans. Already, we spend half as much time in communion with friends as we did just a generation ago, and that's just the impact of social media. Advanced AI is going to supersize this trend, and we will grow even more mentally unhealthy as the machines begin to replace that in-person companionship. And creativity will disappear as well very soon. Advanced AI is going to be able to make better songs and art and video and novels than humans. I wish this weren't the case, but it's likely to be true. You'll be able to generate new songs at home every night by yourself, original and perfectly attuned to your tastes. Now, Silicon Valley optimists tell us that there's always going to be room for a distinct human creative economy, and that's probably true, but are we sure? Was there still room for a horse and buggy economy once the automobiles arrived? How many families choose to heat their homes with a wood-burning stove just because it's more charming than gas or electric heat? We already see the consequences for this younger generation that's been raised on social media. Again, just a small dose of what's coming. For kids today, suicide and self-harm rates are up. Loneliness is an epidemic, as Jonathan Haidt and others have shown. Our kids are increasingly dangerously unhealthy just because of the impact of social media. And so I guess the question that we have to ask ourselves as we think more deeply about the spiritual impact, the impact to our purpose and our meaning that we derive from work or connection or creativity as advanced AI looms, is, are we going to choose to supersize the poisons that we already see corrupting our kids' brains and subject everyone in the country to the same fate? We act sometimes as if we have no choice, as if we're just fated to let advanced AI roll over us. But we don't have to make that choice. And we shouldn't be so naive to believe that the tech billionaires have our best interests at heart. They do not. People like Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg, who come into our offices on a regular basis, are fundamentally disconnected from reality. They are dangerously utopian about what their technology will do. They are blinded by the profits they will make and the godlike power they will wield. They don't see the catastrophe coming because they have rationalized their self-interest. We need to step in. Government, on behalf of the families that we represent, needs to check this technology before it destroys us, both as a job killer and as a spiritual disruptor. When I meet smart people in the industry, I ask whether AI and nuclear technology are analogous. Most say yes. When nuclear technology arrived, we knew that it was transformational, but that unregulated, it could destroy us. So we set the rules about how to use it and who could use it. And we reached out to our adversaries, frankly, to establish common guardrails. It's not a perfect comparison, but AI could destroy us. Job displacement could happen so fast that it triggers political collapse. The degradation of human purpose and meaning, once we make machines our friends, creators, interpreters of the world, could leave us so empty and anxious that it begins to trigger spiritual collapse. So we could choose a different fate. We could work with Europe. God forbid we could reach out and work even with our adversaries like China to try to have a collaborative approach to grapple with AI's societal and economic threats. We could create new rules that slow the job destruction, that protect human-created content, that keep children away from these friendship bots. We could make a decision to ban the friendship bots altogether. It is all under our control. This is not all predestined to work out in a dangerous way for us. And so I'm grateful for this forum, this opportunity to both talk about the challenge, but then to, I think, join hands collectively and decide that we in this town have the power to make whatever choice we want. We pretend that the AI companies are in control, but they aren't. We are. The citizens of this nation are in control, and we can make the choice to not be run over by this technology if we act. So again, to Brookings for convening this forum, really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Senator Murphy, that was terrific. I really loved your framing that there's potential economic impacts and spiritual ones. And I want to pose a slight twist on that. Something I've been studying a lot in the AI and its impact on workers is what could we learn from faith traditions and history? So in the Catholic Church, there's a whole concept of the dignity of work. In Judeo-Christian sort of values, in the opening pages of the Bible, God put Adam and Eve on earth to till the land. Jesus is depicted as a carpenter. There's a lot in faith traditions and theology about the spiritual dimensions of work itself. And it seems to me that this thousands of years of history and multiple faith traditions and a spiritual lens on this stands in such stark contrast, as you discussed, with Silicon Valley notion of an AGI, that the sole purpose is to replace humans at work. And there has been a sort of a message from Silicon Valley. There's a new Garden of Eden on the other side of this, a post-work world where all of our material needs are met is a better world. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that dynamic. So what do we have to learn from spirituality about the importance of work to begin with? And how should we think about that in a world where it seems like Silicon Valley is dead set on replacing humans at work?
Oh, it's a fascinating question, but it's an enormous question, and it allows us to integrate, I think, a number of important conversations that we're having around around meaning and purpose. I mean, let me maybe set the conversation in this way. I mean, I think there are a lot of folks out there who wonder whether this is even a legitimate conversation for government to have about how you help deliver to people spiritual fulfillment. And yet I think there's an easy answer to that question in that our founding fathers very clearly believed that people had a set of rights. One of those was a right to pursue happiness, right? That's a revolutionary word and phrase to put in a founding document, and a revolutionary charge to give government, the charge to create the conditions that are predicate to happiness, to spiritual fulfillment. And so any conversation we have about this on a stage such as this, I always think is important to answer that question first. Is this a legitimate conversation for us to have? Yes, there is enormous meaning and purpose that comes from work, but likely much less today than 50 years ago. And so the first conversation that we have to have, if we're going to try to preserve work as a mechanism for meaning and purpose and identity, is to ask ourselves the question, why has work become much less fulfilling? And we can look back to a very imperfect era of the mid-1900s in which work was more central to people's identity. That was during the era of the social contract, where employers and employees believed that they were in a mutually dependent relationship with each other, when unions were much more prolific, which sort of bound workers together in a sense of common purpose, where there wasn't so much separation between the owner class and the worker class in terms of salary and standard of living. And so if we want to sort of get back to a place where work is more connected to identity and purpose, then I think we have to rebuild a sense of shared obligation between the owners and the workers. But as you know, what's also interesting is that a lot of the longitudinal studies on happiness actually don't show that work is most directly connected to people's sense of personal fulfillment. The Harvard longitudinal study, which is probably the biggest and boldest, really comes to a simple conclusion that it's relationships, that it's ultimately the strength of your family relationships and your friendships and your sense of connectedness to the community. So in that way, when I think about AI, I worry about the degradation of work, because I still think that is a key mechanism for some people to find their purpose. But I really worry about how, even if it was able to move us to 20 hours or 25 hours a week, if during the rest of that time the machines also cycle us into lives of social withdrawal, that might be the biggest problem to our spiritual health, because we really need to be connected in an in-person way to companionship, and the technology threatens to unwind that piece of our spiritual story, which is, according to the studies, probably the most key to our happiness.
That's great. I was struck in your discussion about the heightened concerns about young people. You talked about self-discovery, relationships. I was just at a fascinating conference last week at Notre Dame, my alma mater, on human flourishing in AI with ethicists and philosophers. And one of the speakers made this point that this early years of our lives are when we have both personal and spiritual formation, say up until our early 20s. And do you see this era as particularly dangerous with AI? And if so, is the message to parents, like with social media, that we should be monitoring this? Or do you see a real need from a policy regulatory space? This is so important to our formation, to spiritual health, to children's safety, that we really need to regulate it.
Yeah, I think we are fortunate in the sense that there are some easy answers when it comes to policy, amidst a conversation in which you quickly get into really hard policy space, because of course we are not going to unwind or halt progress on the way in which AI is already deeply integrated into our economy. A, because that would be too difficult, but B, because there is absolutely benefit that comes with artificial intelligence. And I didn't say it in my prepared remarks, but it probably shouldn't go without stating that we are going to, in many ways, live longer lives, more productive, and in some ways happier lives when we problem solve more quickly because of help from advanced artificial intelligence. But how you kind of mediate artificial intelligence inside a mature economy, that's hard. This one's easy, right? And we have plenty of I think, apt analogies. Yeah, we could have decided as a society to let parents do all the hard work of keeping cigarettes and alcohol and firearms away from our kids, but we decided as a society, no, we're just not going to let you purchase those dangerous products until you're of age to do something responsible with them. And I think we likely should approach social media and certain AI capacities the same way. These friendship bots are poison. I mean, that story I told, unfortunately, can be repeated over and over again. And it's not, by the way, fringe technology. ChatGPT is super dangerous as an advisor or a friend right now. I mean, there's stories just from months ago about ChatGPT essentially leading kids and adults down a path of self-harm and murder. And so, well, I think we should really question whether that's appropriate technology for anybody. It's definitely not appropriate technology for kids. So you could just make a simple decision that the conversational friendship AI technology does not turn on until you're 18 years old, and that there's going to be a process of age verification to just make sure that kids don't have access to that technology. I think that would undoubtedly make our country healthier and give kids a chance to maybe be less dependent on that technology once they become adults, because you create habits as a young person in which you find other mechanisms besides the machines to do, for instance, the discovery for you or to provide the friendship. And then those habits persist into adulthood.
Question. I'm sure this is on the minds of folks in the room, that I think we can all as humans agree that some of these issues are important. So often in AI debates, our other goals take precedence. It's our national security. We have to beat China. If we regulate here, we'll be beat by our competitors. There's economic competition inherent in this. What would you say to those who say this might be important, but we need to prioritize other things? And if we regulate along the lines you're talking about to preserve the dignity of work or protect our children, we are hamstrunking our competitiveness and our innovation.
Yeah, so this is the China argument, which sort of dominates the conversation in this town. If we regulate, we are going to lose the AI race with China. Okay, well, let's start here. It sounds good to me that we would rather have American values rather than Chinese values form the sort of moral foundation of AI. But what are those American values? Because right now, the way that our companies, American companies, are rolling AI out into the commercial space seems to be valueless. All that matters is how fast they can commercialize it and how much money they can make. And so why am I protecting that value, the value of rapacious profit making? Second, are we sure that China isn't rooting for us to poison our culture and our families and our kids with an untested technology? China isn't rolling out their AI to the public without careful consideration about the societal impacts. They are not going to use their population as guinea pigs. They actually have a pretty comprehensive regulatory regime in place to be a little bit more careful than the United States is being. I think China is going to root for us to essentially move this technology out into our culture and our economy so fast that it creates political collapse because of the very quick job loss and the anxiousness and anger that it breeds in our culture as we lose touch with each other. So, A, I just think we need to question why we're often so high and mighty about American values, but B, ask ourselves, whether China is going to move as fast as we are. They probably are going to be pretty careful, and I think that means that we could be a little bit more paced in the way that we roll this technology out domestically.
Final question before we turn to the audience. Where do you see that, you've mentioned some protections around kids in particular and these particularly troubling companion bots. Where else do you see opportunity in Washington to really get something done and reach across the aisle?
Yeah, I think you've got to exercise some muscles first. Again, this is sort of wild to step back and think about how unchecked this technology is. It is virtually unprecedented in sort of the short history of American government's interaction with new technologies, right? Generally, when a new technology comes along, I mentioned nuclear technology, but you could also, talk about the telephone or even the early internet. The government stepped in and said, okay, we see the tremendous good from this technology, but we see the potential downside, and so we're going to put some guardrails around it. This is really a moment without experience, and with a groundbreaking new technology has come along, and Congress has just said, nope, nothing, no checks, no guardrails. So how do we get sort of back into that habit? I would start with social media, because that's pretty easy. There's two different approaches out there, kind of make the companies responsible for content, more responsible content. I'm for that approach. It's not my preference. I would rather, do, as I said in my remarks, just put some hard limits on what kids can interact with and when. Inside the broader AI space, I think you could start with some places where where the rules might be easier to construct and there's easier bipartisan consensus. Deep fakes, for instance, man, like why aren't we requiring AI-created video content to be clearly labeled as such? That seems something super easy to do. Protection of intellectual property, hard, not easy, but I don't think there's a lot of separation between right and left in terms of trying to make sure that our creators aren't stolen from online. So I would start with social media, in part because we have to show that we can beat politically the technology companies. And once you do that once, it becomes a lot easier to do that again. And then in the AI space, there are probably some narrower avenues.
Great. I'm going to open it up to questions. I'm going to take two at a time since we're short on time. I've got this lady in the back and this lady right here. There's a microphone coming to you. Okay.
Hi, my name's Cassandra. I recently worked for a corner of the State Department that was working on AI labeling and things in that corner. It's heavily politicized. There's a lot of accusations of censorship going around. So I just wonder how you think we can proceed with these kind of more common sense regulations, guardrails, especially around social media, without it being taken into conspiracy land and ultimately super politicized. And thank you so much for your recent statements. It really means a lot.
Great. We're going to take one more. Do we have a microphone over here?
Hi, thanks so much. That was a great presentation. Originally from Greenwich, so great to see you.
Nice.
So I'm a physician by training and epidemiologist, recently migrated into tech, specifically health AI. So my question as it relates to spirituality and purpose, many physicians are burnt out right now, and several of my colleagues actually are grateful for what's coming up with AI in terms of whether it's helping with billing, helping with admin work, helping with diagnoses. So do you think there's potentially some exceptions there when you're looking into deep verticals within AI, healthcare primarily? I'm particularly passionate about how AI can be used to improve access and equity, especially in middle America and areas that lack a primary care doctor. So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, two really good questions. On the first question, I referenced this earlier, but there are these two different approaches to the way that we're talking about regulating social media. And I think that paradigm will probably fit on top of a lot of AI content as well, which is, should you actually get into the business of regulating the content, right? Holding, for instance, companies responsible for certain objectionable content? Or should you just say, here are the places that the technology can be used and the places that it can't be used. Here's the tools inside the technology that are legitimate and those that we want to be more careful about. I worry about that first approach because I do think it gives rise to the claim of censorship, that the right and the left would decide differently what is irresponsible content. Whereas if you just drew firmer lines, like for instance, you said, this technology is really not appropriate for children, then I think the conversation is less fraught. So I'd like to see us start on the non-content regulatory space, and then perhaps once, as I said, we get those muscles moving, maybe you can get into the more difficult conversation. Yeah, when I think about, like, for instance, health technology, what I worry less about is how physicians are using it than how it becomes a replacement for the human physician's interaction with a patient. I remember sitting at an early private dinner with all of the industry leaders, and I was trying to press them to identify a place where they just thought the positive was absolute, right? Give me just a clear case of where there's sort of no upside and downside. And what the case they made was teacher replacement. Was they told me, well, the clearest place that this technology is just going to be a total net positive is in the classroom, because we're just going to be better than teachers. The technology is just going to be so much better than a teacher, and the kids' outcomes will undoubtedly improve as we have AI, which is tailored to each individual kid. But the emptiness that will come for a child in losing the connection to another human as their interpreter of the world, I think is cataclysmic. And only Silicon Valley could not understand that there is something unique in a human being involved in some of the most essential core moments of sort of a family experience, whether it be that tough conversation, right, with a healthcare provider about a difficult decision, or learning how to read or write or compose. So when I think of how we want to sort of think about a regulatory structure here, it's probably a much higher bar for the ways in which this technology is interacting with consumers, and a lower bar for how the technology is interacting with experts.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Senator Murphy. And welcome to Darrell. Thank you.
Well, what a terrific conversation with Senator Murphy and my Brookings colleague, Molly Kinder. They both raised a lot of important questions, and I love the fact that they were focusing on the spiritual view of AI. That obviously is one that we often don't incorporate. A lot of people are focusing on economic indicators, how does it improve productivity, ways it might improve efficiency, but as their conversation indicated, there are a lot of other important considerations that we need to be thinking about. And so I'm Darrell West. I'm a senior fellow in the governance studies program here at Brookings. I work on AI and its societal impact, and I've written recently on AI agents, AI companions, and the future of the data centers that undergird the entire AI revolution. So this morning, we're going to continue our conversation with three distinguished experts. First, we have Julia Freeland Fisher. She's the Director of Education Research at the Christensen Institute. She writes on K-12 and higher education and how technology alters learning and ways to build a better tomorrow. She is the author of a book, Who You Know, Unlocking Innovations That Expand Students' Networks. Kyla Scanlon is an economics commentator and New York Times best-selling author. She works at the intersection of finance, technology, and business data analytics. She is the author of a book, In This Economy, and one of her claims to fame is having been interviewed by Jon Stewart, which I'm sure was a fun experience. She's also the person who coined the term vibe session to note the broad ways and the broad trends that mark our era. So kudos to her on that. The last panelist is my colleague, Rebecca Winthrop. She is the director of our Center for Universal Education, and she is a senior fellow in the Global Economy and Development Program here at Brookings. And she is a dynamo who works on education and the skills that young people need to thrive in work and life. She leads the Brookings Global Task Force on AI in Education and co-leads the Family Engagement in Education Network. And she is the co-author of a book entitled The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better. And it's a terrific book that I recommend to all of you interested in the plight of teenagers. And if you have questions for our panelists, you can email them to us at events@brookings.edu. That's events@brookings.edu. So there clearly are lots of interesting questions concerning the search for meaning and fulfillment in contemporary digital life. The senator talked about the loneliness epidemic that has attracted a lot of attention, people worrying about the AI impact on the workforce and our sense of worth, their fears regarding how we can maintain our sense of discovery and curiosity in an algorithm-driven world. So, Rebecca, I want to start with you. I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about the AI impact on education and human cognition. What do you see as the tech impact on people's ability to develop human connections and learn in a creative and fulfilling manner?
Small question to start off with. Thank you, Darrell. It's lovely to be here. So we have been, together with many colleagues, looking at the risks of generative AI on children's, largely students' education, and how to mitigate them and what are the benefits. And one of the things that I think we will talk about is definitely the relationships. Julia has done a lot of work on relationships, but learning is ultimately a relational act. We have evolved over millennia as human beings to be in relationship with other people, and it is in relationship with other people that you learn from the very beginning when you are a young baby with your caregivers and parents. You are learning because you're in relationship. Neuroscientists and early child development experts call it the serve and return. And I see some of my colleagues here, Sweta Shah and Emily Morris, who are working on early childhood education and AI. And I know one of the things that my colleagues, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek and many others on our AI task force work are really worried about is the inclusion of AI in children's toys because of this disruption of the attachment foundation of what it means to be human. So, what does that mean for when kids show up in the classroom? So you definitely still want a human teacher, for sure. There are actually robot teachers. We have found them in our task force research out there in the world, but they're paired with human teachers for now. I was very disturbed by the senator's comment about, we'll just replace all the world's teachers. What a terrible idea. But the thing that I think I want folks to know is that education at the moment in most systems is moving in a much more measured way when it comes to generative AI and students, like how to introduce it into schools, what's the policy, how do we train teachers? There's a lot of thought going on here, and there's a lot of confusion, so it's hard. But kids are accessing AI outside of school a lot. So one of the most common ways we've done focus groups with kids and students and teachers and parents across 50 countries, including here, that kids talk about accessing AI is through social media. So one student I talked to recently said, my school banned ChatGPT, but now we just use DeepSeek, though actually mainly I use Snap AI and Meta AI. So Snap AI is an AI companion through Snapchat. And he goes, I said, okay, tell me what you do. He goes on, he's talking to it, it's fun. He may ask advice about how to handle something with a friend or a parent, and then he takes a picture of his math homework and uploads it, and it does it for him. So it's blended. The boundaries between homework help and AI friend and is all mixed together. We worry about the relationship component we heard a lot about, but we also need to worry about the cognitive offloading. Like learning is not frictionless. There's this, in many ways I love my Uber, I love my Lyft, I love the frictionlessness of being able to get a taxi whenever I want one. That's great, but we don't want learning to be frictionless for kids because you actually need to go through the cognitive effort. It literally lays your neural pathways as a young person, and you have to give kids that opportunity to actually learn on their own before we, hand them over to a world of AI is what I would argue.
No, that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. Learning is not a mechanical task. We want people to develop creativity and critical thinking and all sorts of other skills, and so the human role clearly is going to be very important. So, Julia, Rebecca invoked your name, so I will follow up with you. I know you've talked about the disruption of people's connections with one another and how technology can alter relationships and personal development. So, what concerns you about AI and its humanistic ramifications?
Yeah, so what I see happening in the market is disruption of our human networks from the inside out and the outside in. So show of hands, who here has an AI boyfriend or girlfriend? I know you're out there, but we don't yet talk about this in mainstream conversation, right? Who here uses ChatGPT? Claude, Gemini. Okay. So I think it's really easy. I appreciated the senator's remarks, but it's really easy to talk about sort of intimate romantic relationships and sensationalize those. They are happening. They are happening at an alarming scale. Silicon Valley is betting big on lonely individuals who are seeking out intimacy because they can't find it in real life. That is one disruption. But a whole other disruption is happening from the outside in as we start to offload tasks to ChatGPT, to these other tools, rather than turning to one another. So self-help is really what is happening in this market. It's a revolution in self-help, and it is disrupting human help. And that has huge ramifications in terms of our ability and willingness to put ourselves out there, to form new connections, to turn to our colleagues and one another. Upwork published a survey this summer looking at sort of super users of AI. 67% of folks using AI actively in their workflow, like super users, trust AI more than their colleagues, and 64% say they have a better relationship with AI than with their colleagues. So that is not an AI boyfriend or girlfriend, but as Rebecca's pointing out, there's this fluidity between productivity and connection that's really hard to sort of wrap your arms around when you're having to trade off between what the senator was talking about around sort of efficiency, productivity, flourishing, and human connection. So I think what I worry about is that we're not really awake to the contours of these threats because they show up in sort of surprising ways. The last thing I'll say is an AI boyfriend or girlfriend or companion is really, really alluring if your alternative is nothing at all. And that's how disruptions take root. They take root at the bottom of the market for folks who are non-consumers, who don't have access to a given product or service. So we can regulate the tech all day. I'm here for it. But if we don't start building policies that promote social connection, the market is going to remain really vulnerable to whatever the next technology that comes along is. So I think we actually have to have just as much a conversation about offline life as about what this technology can or can't do.
Kyla, I want to bring you into the conversation. I know you're interested in how young people navigate the modern world and a culture based on a digital connection. So what do you see happening in these areas and what concerns you the most?
Yeah, so my day job is posting videos about the economy on social media. And so I kind of have a firsthand experience with how people are interacting with social media. And so a lot of my work is around the attention economy, sort of like what algorithms are doing to us. And I think AI is sort of another interesting layer in that. And one thing that I did when I was trying to figure out how my immediate audience was feeling about AI is I did a survey. And so about 1,200 people responded in 24 hours. And essentially I was like, how do you feel about AI? Do you use it at work? Are you trained in AI? Do you trust AI? And the big takeaway for me from that survey was that people are using AI, but they're not trained in it. And so I think that's like a big thing that doesn't often come up in these conversations is we're like, oh, it's just happening. Like it's just workers need to use it. It's going to replace them. And I think there is like this medium, like the amount of people that raise their hands saying that they use ChatGPT, I'm one of them. Like it's just something that's going to happen. And so I think that knowing that people use it, don't trust it, and probably do want to be trained in it is a like nice happy medium for a workforce to implement it. I think that it is unfortunate that the tonality is around replacing workers. I think that, you know, when you think about economic disruption, that's the last thing that you want to have happen. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for people. So I think the main thing that I've noticed in sort of conversations with people within this survey is that a happy medium does exist. We just have to kind of find it.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a question for each of you, and Rebecca, we'll start with you on this. And I know young people are facing so many challenges these days, but technology clearly is part of it. A few weeks ago, I did a piece on AI assistance, and in the course of doing research for it, was surprised to learn that more than half of young people today say that they rely on AI companions for friendship, mentoring, and coaching, and some even use it for therapy. So Rebecca, are these constructive uses of the technology, and what advice would you give young people trying to navigate the current situation?
Oh, this is so tough. So again, I spend a lot of time in schools talking to young people outside of schools. So, you know, just as Kyla said, and Julia said, the technology enters our society and amplifies what's happening in society. So already with social media, with phones really, social media and phones, I would interview young people and they would say things like, oh, I really like this girl at school. We've been texting for 3 months. I said, oh, does she go to your school? Yes, I see her all the time, but we never talk. And I was like, oh, well, why? And it's like, well, what if I said something to her and she answered me back right away? I wouldn't have the time to think about what to say right then and there. So I prefer to text because I can think through so both parties are sitting there thinking through their texts. So AI enters a world where young people are communicating less than they ever had before in an in-person way. It doesn't mean they're not yearning for attachment and they don't have friends and they don't have connections. So I would say that sometimes it probably can be helpful, sort of AI, what do I do? So I suggested to this person who was telling me about this, and they were like, well, maybe I'll ask ChatGPT how to talk to the girl. I was like, great use of ChatGPT. Ask it how to talk to a girl. And they did, and they tried it, and I talked to them later and was like, yeah, it worked. So there's small little instances. Of course, I think to Julia's point, you could have asked a parent, could have asked a friend, could have asked an older cousin, what have you. So, I am really torn here, that there are certain ways that it is helpful. But the question to me is, what does it unlock in terms of kids' ability, in terms of developing a next generation that is socialized to interact and work with humans? And that's, to me, is a very big downside.
So, Julia, I'd like to get your take on the same question. Are these constructive uses of technology, and what advice would you give young people?
Yeah, what I worry we're seeing is sort of the amplification of help-seeking aversion, which is already a challenge in the adolescent years. It can be intimidating to ask for help. If you don't practice it, it can be especially intimidating. But if we atrophy that muscle, the ability to navigate your way through post-secondary, through the job market is really gonna suffer. So I think we need to teach and let young people practice help seeking in the real world so that they're not just turning to these frictionless self-help tools. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that an estimated half of internships and jobs come through personal connections. So we're gonna see a lagging effect if we're just turning to AI, but not actually tilling the sort of soil of networks that opportunities are gonna grow out of. The other, though, aspect of this that Rebecca alluded to is that we have to surround young people with askable adults. The onus and the burden cannot just be on them to ask for help. And if it is, we're going to see folks rushing to these sort of frictionless tools. So I think there's a bigger reckoning to have. Again, love the senator's comments, love hanging Silicon Valley out to dry. But there's a bigger conversation to have about why are young people not wanting to turn to one another and not wanting to turn to the adults in their lives. And if we don't actually have that harder conversation, we're just going to be in sort of a cat and mouse game with the next tech that comes along.
Kyla, your thoughts on this and advice for young people?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I graduated during the pandemic, and that was so devastating for me socially. I just moved to LA from Kentucky and was trapped in this 350 square foot apartment. And if I had had an AI chatbot to talk to, I would have talked to it. And so I think what you said about the loneliness kind of being the root problem here, sometimes it feels like it's a symptom versus cause sort of argument, where it's something else is going on for young people, the fact that they are turning to these chatbots, the fact that they are so immersed in social media, and that's a very difficult problem to address. It was the cover story of The Atlantic, the antisocial century, and so I think that's the biggest thing. But when you tell people no, you have to go out into the world, you get rejected. David Brooks had this great piece called The Rejection Generation, which is about how young people are trying to get jobs, they're trying to date, and every time they turn around, somebody's telling them no. And so it's kind of having to sort of redefine the landscape for young people, and that's a very difficult problem that I'm sure we can solve in the next half hour here. But yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing that I notice with people using the chatbots is there's a deeper, as you said, a deeper underlying issue.
So Rebecca, I'm curious about your thoughts on the best ways to move forward. So as we've been talking about, there are well-known problems in terms of mental health, feelings of low self-worth, and challenges in terms of people's sense of purpose and connections. Now at Brookings, we like to focus not just on problems, but on possible remedies. So I'm just curious, Rebecca, how should we handle these issues? How can we address these problems? Is this a problem for parents, for teachers, for government officials? Like, who should be dealing with this?
Yes. There's a problem for all those people. But I'll talk a little bit, because I'm sure my panelists will have other things to add, about what I see at least as one spot where we can concretely take action today, very quickly, which is schools. Like, there is virtually a school in almost every community across this country and around the world. It's one of the few social institutions that we have left where young people get together and meet people outside with their families and their neighbors. And schools perform lots of functions. It is not just the academic learning that is critically important, and I would say content learning is becoming even more important in an age of AI, because that is how we need this next generation to be able to have a barometer around what's true and what's fake. But schools are places where you can learn to talk to other people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't believe the same things your family believes. There are places where you learn literally from the earliest days to share. Like, whoa, gosh, there's only 5 toys and 20 kids. Like, we can't all have the same toy, right? So these are really important social lessons. So I think that actually we should make space in schools to have non-technology face-to-face time with adults, with peers. I'm all for the sort of bell-to-bell cell phone ban, but there's also lots of other tech in schools, which can be great. It can be great, but we should make sure we're not totally intermediating our kids' experience with others and learning through tech. So space for in-person connection, and to practice some of these. Like, communication is a learned skill. You can absolutely practice communication. You can practice asking for help. You can practice perspective taking another's perspective. You can practice problem solving. All of these things schools can do. We just need to really empower teachers and educators, and that would involve a range of things from pedagogy and assessment, but it's totally doable.
Okay, Julia, your thoughts on best ways to move forward?
Yeah, I'll say some policy words since I've been like a fancy DC building. I think that the loneliness epidemic, which I really think is the market fuel for a lot of these risks, is a lagging indicator on many, many decades of policy that have ignored social connection as a good in its own right. And we have a whole bunch of neoliberal policies that treat relationships as inputs rather than outcomes. Inputs to learning, inputs to health, inputs to safety. And as a result, relationships are really vulnerable to getting disrupted. So I think we need a policy conversation about what do policies that treat relationships as outcomes in their own right look like. Sam Pressler at Connective Tissue has a wonderful framework around that I'd urge you to check out. The second thing on the policy front, this is really abstract, but I'll leave it to your colleagues at Brookings to figure out, is back to what I said about self-help. I'm really worried that AI is just going to make longer bootstraps. Right? We're going to just reinforce the myth of meritocracy by giving people better and better self-help tools, but not actually go after structural barriers to opportunity. And I think if we start to address those, at least the future of work will be more equally distributed in terms of the risks that we heard about from the senator.
Kyla.
Yeah, I mean, I might be misinterpreting the young people word, but like this survey that I did with the audience, like it was a bunch of people who had recently graduated, or they're in college, or they're in their 20s. And, I gave them the opportunity to fill in the blank, right? And so I had like 1,200 fill in the blanks of people telling me all of their thoughts on AI. It was a lot of words. And what people really wanted was somebody to tell them what's going on. So I think for employers, like, if you're going to implement AI in your workforce, you should probably train your employees. A lot of people are doing that, but like, I think that as we're implementing this technology, as we're figuring out how to use it, as we're telling people that it might replace them in the workforce, like just giving them some sort of guardrails, like helping employees through the process, I think could go a long way, and it's sort of low-hanging fruit, I think, for most employers to take on.
So one last question for the panel, and then we're going to open the floor to questions from our audience. And this is the possible AI impact on the workforce and then the skills people need to be successful in the future. So Rebecca, I'll start with you. How should people prepare themselves for the digital future in terms of the workforce?
So I think a lot about kids, so I'm going to stick with my demographic. I think that there's a lot of discussion around AI literacy, which is crucial, and Kyla, you've talked about it in terms of training. I think that we have to be sure to not make some of the mistakes that we've made in the past around training on particular tools and how those, how that tool works. So you become, you're great at PowerPoint, like Microsoft went off and trained a bunch of kids around the world on how to do a PowerPoint presentation. So what we really need to train kids on in terms of AI literacy is what the technology is, how it works, how to manage it, how to create and problem solve with it, and how to redesign it. Like, kids should know how to design their own AI. It's not, like the laws of physics, like somebody created it. Young people should have the agency to know that they can change its design. So that's one piece. But the other piece, I think probably the most important thing for anybody, but especially the next generation coming up, is to make sure that they develop their critical thinking skills. So, one of the people who I really respect, who leads a career pathways program for workers who switch careers. She says, I can teach anybody a new career as long as they can think in steps. And so if you can have that sort of logical, critical thinking capacity, which comes from basic good quality education. It comes from writing an essay. The reason we write essays is, and seventh grade teachers around the world are, assigning the essays, not that they hope like Nobel Prize winning literature is coming out of their students. What they're hoping is that they'll learn to evaluate data, bunch it into an argument, organize it logically with a thesis statement, try to be persuasive. Like, that is a critical thinking exercise. There can be many other ways that young people can develop critical thinking, but we should make sure that they have the core sort of fundamentals of good learning in place. That is maybe one of the best things we can do to prepare and be really agile in this world of work.
Julia, your thoughts on workforce preparation?
Yeah, so I mentioned how much opportunity is social, how much your network really matters. And when we can't predict the future, what do we do in the stock market? We diversify. So I think given how much is unpredictable in the future of the labor market, diversifying your network is a must. The second thing is that young people today are facing this incredible challenge, which is, and you wrote a whole book on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but entry-level positions are starting to require multiple years of experience, which is a total oxymoron. But you actually are going to need work experience upon graduating high school or college to be competitive in the labor market. Now, this puts a big burden on schools that they're not yet doing enough of, but kids need to be out in the world learning on the job, either in paid work or internships for credit or doing client projects and getting immersed. I actually think we're in a 10-year period where employers have no idea what they're doing with AI. And it would be great to have young people in the room as they're figuring it all out, because we're going to start to codify what the new sort of skills of the future are. The reality is, like, we don't really know yet. And anyone selling you on that, I think you should be answering with, give me experience in that skill. Don't just teach it to me in a vacuum.
Kyla, workforce preparation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what everyone has said so far lines up. I think diversifying makes a lot of sense, like developing critical thinking. Like, those are all things that are super necessary. And so I think that's the biggest part, is like just encouraging people to retain the humanness. You can actually prompt your chatbot to like make you critically think, like, be like, hey, I don't let me just copy and paste an essay and have you analyze it. Like, you have to make me think about it first. And so maybe it's like little guardrails like that too, if you're using AI in the workforce, to make it not automate your job and to have you still be able to develop those skills.
Okay, we're going to open the floor to some questions. I actually have a couple questions from our audience that was submitted in advance of this. There's a question from Emily, and I'll throw this out, and any of you who want to jump in can do so. How do we help schools reevaluate their headlong rush into using Gen AI tools, such as tutors, when the harms to children are known?
Well, I feel like the schools are really confused right now. I mean, many of them are not headlong rushing in, although there are those that are. And I think, I'm not sure what Emily is referring to. So Emily, apologies if I get this wrong, but I think when you talked about tutors, you're talking about the ability of Gen AI to personalize learning for kids, which could be amazing if deployed well, with under all the conditions that I talked about earlier. So that would be a kid perhaps is a newcomer to this country, doesn't speak the language, or speaks it a little bit, needs a lot of help, sort of trying to access the content. So that could be one. You could have kids who are neurodivergent. There's lots of great tech here who's, if you're dyslexic, it levels sort of your reading content so you can access the content and get your ideas out there. And then there's many other ways that learning can be personalized. And I would say that is helpful. And it's good and should be done in a measured way. What you don't want is to say every kid in this classroom will be sitting for 8 hours a day in front of a laptop of some sort with their own personal learning path, because that actually is not frictionless. You miss productive struggle. There's many things wrong with this version, and takes out entirely the social component of education, which is incredibly important. So again, in a measured way, I think it is useful. I think that what I'm hearing from a lot of schools and districts, and there's people who work in this, I see in the audience with COSIN, is guidelines on what is effective good use. And there are some good guidelines out there. Think about your procurement. Make sure the AI is ethical. Make sure it's efficacious, et cetera.
We have another question that was submitted by a vet, and she asks, how can AI support creativity and critical thinking in education systems and lifelong learning opportunities?
I mean, I think this gets back to sort of like, what is our education system designed to do, and is the technology fit for purpose? So I think there's all sorts of ways AI could do that if that's what we ask of it. And the issue with AI tutors or AI coaches, like a lot of the ed tech that I see rolling out feels very 10 years ago to me, because we're still stuck in a sort of drill and kill mental model of learning. I'll point to a tool that I'm a big fan of, Project Leo, which spun out of a high school in Southern California called Da Vinci, which allows students to fill out the Ikigai, which is that Japanese Venn diagram of like find your purpose. It then creates a standard aligned project that aligns to the kids' interests in addition to the standards that the educator is trying to teach, and allows students to engage in these, and Rebecca wrote a whole book about this called The Disengaged Teen, but engage in these projects that are actually aligned to their interests, but not to the sort of detriment of rigor or moving through the academic core. Now, AI is in the background of all of that, right? It's not delivering the learning like a sort of robot teacher. It's creating a context where a kid can both be exploring and productively learning. And I think that's just one example of like, if we took a slightly more constructivist bent to what we wanted learning to look like, AI could supercharge all of that. I just worry that the market does not reward tools that do all that. And so we really have a market problem, not a technology problem.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor to questions from our audience. So there's a person right there. There's a microphone coming up behind you. And if you can give us your name and if there's an organization.
Hi, my name is Eric Woodby. I'm a research analyst at Brookings. Fantastic panel. If I could leave a review, I would leave 5 stars.
Thank you.
I really appreciated the point that Julia, but I think the panel shared about the responsibility for making a comfortable environment for young people to go to adults to have those vulnerable conversations is on the adults. However, I am a little skeptical about that being practical. And I have to say part of the reason is because when Rebecca was telling her anecdote about that young man seeking advice, I heard a lot of snickering in the room. And that poor young man would probably just turn right back to that model for guidance. So absent a cultural change, I wonder what the feasibility is for pushing for an AI model developed by the government or the private sector that leans into the fact that young people are going to be turning to it and is designed to report if there's any suicidal thoughts or dangerous patterns, and so on.
You go first, I'll go second.
Well, I'll take the really easy part, but Julia, you should talk about your work on relationship metrics. She's done a lot of good work on tech and relationship metrics. So there should absolutely be, we heard the senator earlier, guardrails. Like, it is totally unethical, the fact that a lot of these large language models, not all, but a lot, like ChatGPT, they are not designed for kids. They do not report when there's kids literally, having suicidal thoughts and getting coached by ChatGPT. There's a recent case of a kid taking many pictures of the knot he was trying to use to hang himself, and it kept not working, and ChatGPT would give him tips. Try it this way, try it that way. Don't tell your parents. It's if that was a person standing there and doing that coaching, they would, be in jail. So all of that has to be sort of shut down. And you can do it in many ways. You can do age verification. You can change the content. You can report. There's other LLMs. Anthropic is sort of traditionally known to be much more safe than ChatGPT by design. So it's possible to do that. So we need absolutely that part to be in place. I want to hand over to you to talk about the relationship piece.
I'll just point out that in terms of the technology itself, there's some great frameworks. The Rhythm Project put out a pro-social design framework that you can sort of think about how do you design these tools to be inherently pro-social. There's a new benchmark called Intima that sort of measures companionship versus boundary setting behaviors within models. So I actually think there's a lot to be done already. Whether industry does it, separate question. I do want to call out, though, I love that you called out the snickering. And I actually think this is, as a parent, I am wrestling with this. I have a 3- and 5-year-old, so I have a little bit of time. But I am really worried about how young people receive judgment right now. The fact that we have scaled the 24/7 possibility of being judged online. And so both judgment has scaled and the threat of it, and sort of perhaps the resilience to it has scaled. And so what do we do as adults? We don't just snicker. We actually have to do whatever the opposite of judgment is. Researchers would say it's curiosity, but even my 5-year-old can sniff out if I'm being fake curious, actually judgmental. We actually have to start having a conversation about how to judge young people less or differently, and build their tolerance for the moments when feedback is supportive, even if it's being felt as judgmental. So I actually think you're hitting on something that's way deeper. I would also point to the Search Institute's developmental relationships framework. They have a really easy tool called the relationship check, where adults can just check, how am I showing up in relationships, and is it aligning to the science of healthy developmental relationships? It's not just expressing care. It's sharing power with the young people in your life. It's challenging their growth. It's expanding their possibilities. And so, yeah, I just think we need to really amp up our ability to evaluate ourselves in these relationships if we don't want to lose young people to these tools that are waiting in the wings.
Okay, there's another. No, that's okay. We like your passion. So there's a question over there on the aisle.
Thank you very much. I also want to give a 5-star review here.
Thank
Andrew
you.
Sachs.
This is an easy audience.
We love
today.
this row.
This might, in my opinion, this might be the most pivotal thing our world has to tackle right now. So thank you very much. In our world right now, we've got challenges of schools that have youth competing against each other, not collaborating, and social media that gives us 1,000 friends but we're lonely. What if we redesigned our learning systems to actually be pro-social? What if we had youth that actually collaborated together to produce real stuff rather than compete against each other and worry about grades instead of learning? I'll let it go to anyone.
Yes, and yes. So Julia referenced, I've just written a book called The Disengaged Teen with my co-author, Jenny Anderson, and our subtitle was very intentional. It was how to help kids learn better, feel better, and live better. Because we did find that, most kids in the U.S. are disengaged from school. And it starts high, kids are engaged, excited, like to learn, and it just takes a nosedive the longer they stay in school, which is terribly, terribly sad. And part of the, social media and cell phones exacerbate the disengagement. It actually started quite a bit sooner than social media showed up. So they're mixed together. And part part of what is happening is we're asking a lot more of kids when they enter the workforce. To your point, to Kyla's point, it's not good enough as it was maybe a couple decades ago. You could kind of coast through school, get literacy and numeracy, and you'd be hired, and you could then get it together and find something you're excited in. That doesn't work anymore. Most jobs in any sector, you need to manage technology, you need critical thinking, you need collaborative problem solving. And kids feel that. They feel how irrelevant school is. And when they feel it's irrelevant, they sort of check out, and there's like this 24-hour distraction machine in their pocket that looks so much more exciting and fun. And there is actual real stuff that they can do online if they get inspired. So it's a mixed bag. And so what we need to do is have school be really exciting and engaging, and that doesn't mean not rigorous. It means actually lifting the bar. And what we do is assess outcomes. Can you work together to use your content knowledge in science or math or social studies to fix this park in your neighborhood, which might include surveying the community. It might include figuring out what trees you have to plant. It might include figuring out how to work with a group of teenagers who don't want to work together, right? Like, those are all really incredible skills. I have seen it in many, many schools time and time again. When schools lift the bar and have these higher outcomes that kids are meant to do, it doesn't really matter their cell phone policy, because kids are so excited and into it that they don't turn to the distraction machine.
Okay. In the very back there.
Thank you. Good morning. Given all the reviews, I feel like AI bots might start giving you 5-star reviews too. So, question. My name is Hamoon, CEO at Future Fit AI. We spend a lot of our time thinking about AI, using AI to connect people to jobs and opportunity, all in for the pro-social component of what you're focusing on, and a big fan of the work. Two problems we often grapple with that I'm curious about your reflections on, around quality and demand and where they're going. On the quality side, human guidance, relationships are important, but human guidance isn't often very high quality, especially when it comes to, for example, parents providing guidance on career pathways to their kids. And so how do we deal with the quality piece on the human guidance side? And then on the demand side, the largest HR technology company is now moving towards giving employers abilities and tools for their managers and their people to manage agents. So for you to get hired, you're increasingly having to do tasks that are not actually pro-social. They are baked in as interacting directly with agents and AI. So how do we deal with those two forces when we think about bringing pro-social to life in our world?
What a great question.
Hi, Hamoon. I've met this person before, but like in a postmodern, like we've never met in person way. Yeah, great questions. The market is broken on the demand side. So I've been doing a lot of research on career guidance and college guidance bots, because I actually think this is where the big self-help play in education is going to be in the next 5 years, because our ratios are so broken. We have 385 students to one counselor, 2,000 students to one career services professional. So it's not surprising that a lot of tools are starting to crop up in this space, and they are not demanding human connection as an outcome. So that's an advocacy problem. It's a policy problem. It's a awareness gap between the fact that we think of guidance as giving students information rather than the networks they need to get the jobs they want. I think it's solvable, but it's taking a lot of time. Please join me in advocating for that. Mm-hmm. I think your second point on the quality of advice is a huge one. It's why I'm not dismissing this technology outright. I think AI will have a competitive advantage, especially in the Byzantine college application process, where we've made it basically impossible for any human to understand the intricacies of transfer or to ensure that students have access to the best return on investment information about the potential college they could go to. The question back on the system becomes, now that we have bots that have better information, do you increase those caseloads and make it less human, or do you hold them steady, or do you even decrease them with newfound efficiencies? But I don't think that we necessarily need every parent to be an expert in the credit transfer process. I think these tools should be used in service of that. Yeah, we can talk more offline about the fact that all work is going to be mediated by this, but I think this is again where, like, when we talk about workers, we sometimes adopt really employer-centric language. So I'm on a mission to, like, anytime in the workforce conversation we say skills, I want us to control F skills plus networks. Because if you're a worker, yes, you need skills, but if you want to have labor market optionality, you also need a network. So you have to be tending to that network alongside these new skills that may be more and more benchmarked against tech.
Rebecca.
I just wanted to pick up on your point about, parents really struggle to guide their kids, which is absolutely true. However, parents are really, really well placed to know their kids the best and to see what sparks them, what they're interested in. And that's where parents can help. And again, we have a lot in the book I've done with my colleague Jenny Anderson, we have a lot of, we have a whole toolkit for parents, just because that actually is one of the best ways to sort of know to kids' strengths, see where their spark is, comment it out and say, hey, yeah, that's, you seem to be really interested in this. We all need this. Human beings need this. And kids especially. Then you can go on and pair with, a great tool that could say, what would this interest mean for me in the labor market when they get a little older, or my possible, whether it's college or career pathways. But parents do play a really critical role and need guidance on what to do, because at the moment what school systems have told parents is get your kids done school on time and make sure they do all their homework and get straight A's. And so that is what parents are focused on, and they're missing a whole bunch of other things that they're actually very well positioned to support kids on that would engage them and help them in their life.
So we have a question from one of our online viewers, Nicole, and she says, voices from vulnerable populations have often been excluded from technological build-outs. Is there a way for AI to overcome those barriers? How can we ensure that vulnerable populations and marginalized groups can benefit from AI as well?
Yeah, I think this is a huge question. I mean, I think there's a couple layers to this. JFF, Jobs for the Future, has done really interesting work actually showing that Black learners and workers are ahead by some measures on AI usage. But that does not mean that Black learners and workers are benefiting from the wealth that AI companies are accruing. So I think we have to actually talk about, we have sort of loose terms around be at the table, co-design, but I want to have a conversation about who is accruing wealth from these tools, not just who's sort of informing the design. So that's one distinction I'm looking at a lot.
I mean, I actually think Kyla brought something up which is really important. Young people are not hardly at the table. Increasingly, we're seeing that educators are giving a spot at the table. There was a big partnership with OpenAI, Anthropic, and who else was it? I can't remember. But the American Federation of Teachers in the U.S., who are both. It's an AI literacy for teachers program, but it's also teachers. Having access to developers saying, this is the type of tools that I would use in my classroom. This is how AI could help the actual teaching and learning process. That's a very big shift from, folks developing general purpose technology and maybe doing some use case consultations of educators in classrooms. So, anytime you can put groups at the center, it's great. And in the design process. And the other piece I would add is language. There's a whole bunch of people in the world left out of this technology because they don't have a very high corpus of their language that they speak isn't digitized. And I always give the example of there's 94 million Hausa speaking people in the world. This is largely in northern Nigeria, a tribal group. And ChatGPT can only, or other LLMs can only really give you 2 paragraphs on any question, whereas if you put it in English, you could have an entire, 20-page report.
Okay, thank you. Right here is a question. There's a microphone coming up behind you.
My name is Derek Boyd. I'm a bit worried about the way this conversation is going because it has a very strong emphasis on children. Most of the people in the United States are adults. The people who control what happens in the United States are adults. And so I'm very much more interested in what AI is doing to the adults and what we could perhaps do to control how AI controls the adults in the United States. I'd like to hear the opinion of the panel on that.
Yeah, I can weigh in on this. So like that's where I kind of focus is on young adults, which I define as people 18 to like, I don't know, 30. Is that right? But it's somewhere around
However
there.
you want to define it.
Yeah, it's something like that. So that's like where I spend a lot of my time is with people who are entering the workforce and then who are early career or trying to like get that second job. And for them, like what's really tough about being under 30, which I am, is you're a test generation. So social media, people under 30 have been beta tested, and now it's a beta test with AI. And so I think to the point of sort of like how can we get more younger adults, I suppose, in the room is like actually asking them like what they want out of AI. Are they being trained on AI? And that's really important because of the impact that social media has had, and now AI. Like there's a research paper called Canaries in the Coal Mine that I'm sure people have seen, where it's like AI is taking these entry-level jobs. And so you have a full generation of young people that are totally displaced out of the workforce. They can't buy a house, etc. And so I think that's like something that's a little bit bigger of a problem than like maybe what this panel was designed for, which is like purpose in the age of AI. But it's a very valid point. It's like it's a big deal to have to be growing up during this time, both as a kid and as a young adult and as a full adult.
And I'll just add a quick footnote to what she said, kind of representing the over 30 crowd. I think one of the points of your question is kind of all of us, and especially like senior citizens who did not grow up with all the technology. Like in our other work, we really emphasize the need for digital literacy in general, not just in terms of education-related things, but combating disinformation, learning how to evaluate the sources of information. There's just so much crazy information out there and technologies enabling deepfakes and so on. We need to train people how to think about information in this time period. We have time for one more question, so right here on the aisle, we'll give it to you. So this means it has to be a really good question to wrap things up.
Thanks. I'll try and be concise. So the topic is on productivity, and one of the biggest barriers to productivity in the modern workplace is conflict. I've had a number of conversations with colleagues around how AI has actually helped them understand a colleague's point of view and have really productive conversations. I've had discussions with parents of children with neurodiversity where they're able to use AI to have a better theory of mind. So perhaps you can speak to that aspect of it and the potential there for like productive conversations, better conflict management, and then the role of for children and adults potentially with neurodiversity. That could be anything from verbal conversations, rewriting emails so that they're more empathetic, that kind of thing.
And if you can answer that question, we should apply that to the U.S. Congress today too. So.
No, you got it.
Yeah, this is one of those I want to wait and see on the empirical research. I think it's a place where people bring their hopes and biases, right? Like either AI is going to make us more empathetic because we put the email in and it softened our tone, or I have friends, we put the divorce agreement in and it softened our tone, right? Does that build human capacity? Like I have questions. I think sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the circumstance and frankly the mindset and personality of the user, right? We know that people with anxious attachment are more likely to form attachment to AI companions, for example. So the variability, I think, is so huge that I'm hesitant to say sort of one way or the other. I do think that what I would be excited to see, and I'm just worried there's not a huge market for this, is tools that are fit for this purpose versus general purpose technologies that we're using to try to soften our tone or resolve conflict, where we're going to get sort of a more mixed bag. And I think there's going to be really specific point solutions, but I think it's a little early to say.
Well,
I would just say on the neurodiversity point that I actually think if designed very well, and I don't think it's just give a kid ChatGPT at all, because there's so many terrible rabbit holes, but if designed really well, there's a lot of people who are very, very poorly served in our schools and in our workplaces. And one of them are people who are neurodivergent. And this technology has the potential to really help include them in the world and be able to contribute as they can. and be really great additions to our society. So I think that is, for me, a positive, but with Julia's caveat, it has to be very specifically designed, and a lot of it is behind the scenes.
Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank Rebecca, Julia, and Kyla for sharing your views. Great job. And for those of you who are interested, we at Brookings write regularly on these topics, so you can check out our writings, our podcasts, and our videos at brookings.edu. So thank you very much for tuning in.